and welcome back to V-Road, CCTCG's weekly Vanguard podcast. I'm Cole.
And I'm Trey.
And, today we've got like a pretty brief one, probably, I imagine. It's less of expanding on like any one given topic and more just making people aware of all the online resources there are for Vanguard, as in like deck building and tournament results and like how to get cards. So
yeah, there's a bunch of them, and obviously what we're going to show is kind of some of the ones that we currently use and have used in the past, and with some additional ones for different regions and things. So do some research. There's plenty of other places that we aren't going to cover, like Facebook. There's a bunch of resources there. Obviously, the big one that we're not going to talk on since we're doing it for a video is YouTube. Yep. So, don't be afraid to dig there too as well. So a couple of these resources are super simple and will be very helpful in your journey through Vanguard.
Yeah, I think before we get into the big ones, some honorable mentions, like you said, Facebook. Like there are a couple really big Vanguard Facebook groups. Obviously, like the official Vanguard Facebook page for like. I don't remember if they always did this, but recently they did actually start to upload like pictures and translations of like newer cards from like Japanese Tuesday streams and Thursday streams and stuff like that, which I don't remember if they always did, but it's definitely super helpful that they do it now. And beyond that, like the Facebook groups where you can even go back and forth with other people who play the game and catch up on the news and stuff. But yeah, I think we'll get started. So the first one we've got is it's pretty typical for any card game, is you need to buy the cards. So the TCG player does have everything you need, and it is probably one of the safest ways to get cards. I know there are like other ways to access the secondary market, be it like eBay or like we mentioned, like a Facebook group or something, but like honestly, you're just gonna have a much easier time getting your cards through here, if nothing else, I hope.
Yeah, and we want to make this obvious. We are not sponsored by any of these sites or affiliated with them in any way whatsoever. We are just going through and showing these because we find that they're useful. But TCG player really is a secondary market where you can buy individual singles, bulk, whatever you need to. But do support your local store, because that's the biggest contributor to getting the Vanguard game larger. You buy more products from those stores will carry more and help push the game a little bit more in certain situations. So if you're really looking for some stuff, most of the time, most local stores don't carry a huge bulk inventory of singles, so coming to somewhere like TCG players is a very big help.
Yeah, and it's I remember back a couple of years ago when Vanguard was one of the big games up here, but now you just have to make sure you click more, and then it should be like right.
First one.
The first one? Oh wow, it's the first one. Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, not too hard to find really. They'll always pretty much give you like the most recent set. Yeah, like here's a bunch of lyrical stuff. So yeah, like you can get a good gauge of how much a deck will cost with stuff like this. If you're in Europe though, that is what Card Market is for. I can't really say that like either of us have used it before, but it is there for European folk who deal with the Euro, and it's not like exactly like TCG player, but for people who live like overseas, it is probably one of the best ways to get cards safely, I imagine.
Yeah. Again, do some research on your own, kind of look into these things a little bit, especially for card market things, like secondary hand, anything, eBay, Facebook. Always, do your research and make sure what you're getting into is legit. Again, we don't have any personal experience with this one, but this is just something we've heard about and decided that it was worth bringing up as a discussion for the people overseas from us.
Yeah, I will say really quick, I know that maybe if you're coming from a different card game, you probably don't have the best a relationship with something like TCG Player, but I've heard over and over, there are people I know who they've used the service and like something happens and they don't get the card, or it gets lost and it takes forever, or something happens and they get their money refunded for whatever they bought. Like, the important thing about like TCG Player, briefly before we move on, is that like at the end of the day, it's not like TCG Player as a website makes it so that happens. These are coming from individual game stores, like from all across the country and stuff. So it really, like Trey said, if you just got to make sure you're like looking at the stores you're buying them from. If you notice there are some that like you don't have a good track record with, let's say, like just like try something else. Maybe even if it's a little bit more, it still could be worth the safety of, you know, getting these cards. But moving to like a more smaller end sort of website for stuff like this, is at least one I know really works, which is JP's Curtain Call. They're like really, really solid as far as like case splits and stuff. That's usually where I get my case splits from for like cards, and I've never really had a bad experience with them.
Yeah, and this is just one example of a shop or an individual who decides to open up their own kind of shop, as well as selling cards on their own individual site as well as TCG Player. So you can kind of get a little bit more of a discount typically if you order from their own store. There's other ones like 50 cards. There's a couple others out there that have shops on TCG and will have inventory listed there as well as on their own store. So, kind of dig around to see what, will work best for you. But again, these are just ones that we've used personally and do enjoy using. So,
yeah, I know that as far as like the practice of getting case splits for any given set, I've usually found that if you're somebody who keeps to maybe 1 or 2 nations, it is usually the cheapest way to keep up with the game, like by far. Like I knew going into, let's say, like Divine Set 1, that Keter was going to be a relatively expensive nation, as it has been for a decent bit. So what I made sure to do was pick up a Keter split for Set 1, and it was easily one of the smartest decisions I could make about investing in like a deck like Rezael. So it's just always worth keeping in mind if you like, it's weird because like when you support your local business, that is always the best way to go. And always buy product if you can, but when it comes to just like, okay, I know I want to build this one deck from this one set, and then maybe I don't need to buy a case split for other sets, but I need it to like start like Rezo or whatever. So I would highly recommend that, at least sometimes if you can. It's not usually the most affordable thing, but if you're going for like Stoicheia or like a Brink Gate or something, depending on what it is, they're usually actually very affordable.
Yeah. So, I mean, when it comes to these, you can obviously invest to it however works best for you. If that's, buying boxes, if that's buying singles, buying splits. Personally, my buddy and I, we buy a case of pretty much every set. So we build all of the decks out of it, and have multiples, and then we fill in with pieces from trades and things from our local people. But do what's best for you financially and what makes sense the most for you to be able to get into the game and enjoy it in a reasonable fashion.
Yeah, and what can help with that is kind of knowing how cards or decks are going to be priced out well in advance. And that's why you can honestly just Google like any Japanese like Vanguard singles distributor, and this was just one of the random ones I found. And like when it comes to sealed product, obviously you're not going to get like the best gauge of like how much a deck is going to cost. But if you just use a site like this in general and you check out the singles for any given set, you'll notice that like, oh, this triple rare in Japanese is like 600 yen, which is about like like $4.50 maybe in USD at best. So you can at least tell that like, okay, if this card is this cheap in Japan, where their distribution is really good because of how small the country is and all those things, then when you try to get it when it comes out in America, you're gonna have a good idea, like, okay, I can expect this card to be very reasonable for what I want as far as my budget for a deck.
Yeah, and it's always not 100% accurate, so obviously take everything with a grain of salt when you're going into this kind of research. Don't go into it expecting everything to translate exactly via price, because there are some times where just because of limited printing on the English printing side versus the JP printing side, things might be less easy to acquire and prices may be different, as well as unfortunate, just like anything, there's buyouts of cards and people will resell them at higher things. So it's good to get a rough estimate with these kinds of things, and they are great examples of kind of looking and kind of just getting an idea of what the market may look like. But yeah, again, take everything with a bit of worry. Not necessarily, worry's not the right word for that, but a little bit of
just be very careful and like deliberate with, and be like a little aware of like what you're kind of asking for as a player, because in most cases, depending on the deck you want to build, it actually will never cost as much money as you think it will. But if you go for it's a thing of like, oh, you watch the anime and you're like, oh, I really like Now, I want to build a Varga deck, but then you look at Varga and like, as of recording, he himself is around like $10, which is actually not too bad. But then like the rest of his support is a little inflated because, his new form is being shown in the anime and it's getting hyped up and people are like buying up this card or whatever. So it's never impossible to build a deck in this game at a reasonable budget, but it depending on what it is, you just need to be aware of like what you're like asking for, essentially. If you're going for something would be like reasonably popular, or having something upcoming for it that might affect the price here and there. So just always worth like keeping in mind, I guess. But after getting these cards, it's, well, number one, there's two things. You might not even know what cards to get, and then once you get them, you might not even know how well they perform and how confident you can be going into like your locals or whatever. So that's why we have a lot of these really great resources for deck lists and tournament results. So the first one is the really, really cool, just ran by one guy, VG Paradox. Just probably the best resource in my opinion as far as like tournaments and decks and all those. And we can go ahead. I would say it's probably the simplest to use of all of the main Vanguard sites that are used, because it does sort everything by decks. You can kind of get a rough estimate of what a deck looks like and its tops, like first, second, third place, how many top eights, those kinds of things. And it's very searchable. There's an option to search for everything by deck, nation, clan. Obviously, format. There's the standard format, and most of it, like, you can have it sort by global, or you can have it look specifically at Japanese list. So I mean, you can kind of look by dates, all that kind of above. Obviously, there are some pop-up ads, so you can see that here. But that's just like anything anymore. But it's super simple. This does really only show you tournament tops, so it's good to keep in mind that there are going to be decks that you may be looking for a deck list on here that just doesn't show up. Like if you go and look up Petralka, I'm sure there's not a top in here that'll show, unfortunately. Let me break my own heart. Sure.
But the same could be said about Spino Marquee or Barrow Magnus. Like if you look up Barrow Magnus, its last top was probably in 2022, 2020, like early 2023. Honestly, the fact that it's ranked 16.
So a good example of how to use the system. You just type in a name of a deck, you'll see like, oh, the last time it topped was in 2023 at Bushiroad Springfest Vietnam. Like, and then what's very nice about it as well is, and what we'll get into in more depth in a little bit is, to the very far right of these ranks and like the name of the person who piloted the deck, they'll have the little square here that's the deck list a la Bushiro deck log. So you'll be able to see the exact list they ran, which is always like any website like this that can just take you from data like this to the exact list that was used is very helpful, just very helpful.
Yeah, so things like this will help you kind of keep up with like certain metas. You can kind of even look at like progressions of decks and see like, okay, where did it come from with its support, how it kind of adapted. Like there's a bunch of statistics on here, so you can kind of see like what that tournament was. So like if you clicked on a specific link, it would open up the tournament, and you can see like all the decks that were ran in that tournament that have it logged. You can kind of see all the different tops, what kind of ratios there were. You can even, when you open up a specific deck, you can kind of look at like what the common ratios of individual cards are, and things along those lines. So there's a bunch of information, to go through here, and it's worth digging through and kind of doing some research on your own. So it's, go ahead and do it. It's not gonna cause any issues for you. It's not gonna do anything, but it is a great resource for information.
Yeah, because at the very least, you are building a deck and you have like all the cards on the way, but you don't know how the deck performed in the past, and you also don't know what cards like the deck used to run that you could probably see play again, depending on what's gone on with the deck. This is a really great way to like check all the way back to the beginning of Standard, and you can see like what a set 4 Nirvana list looked like, or obviously with some of these decks they're gonna have a lot of like really dated cards in them, but if you're one of those people who really likes digging into like the meta of a card game's history that you weren't participating in or like aware of the game before that happened, then this is just like the best resource for that, and they keep it up to date. He does a really good job making sure that it's a really good tool to use all the time, especially when it comes to like these at a very quick glance you can see like the top 10 standard decks in global and Japanese, and the best premium and V decks. Like you can really figure out what exactly you might want to go into if you're somebody who's a lot more like competitively minded, and it's less about what the deck is and it's more about how well it's done historically, and there's nothing wrong with that and all that. So from that, we can go into our second really good tournament result resource, which is Dexander, who has been around for a much longer time, and has really like spruced up their site over time. I've noticed it's a lot. This looks really clean as far as what it used to be.
Yeah, and it's kind of nice because everything is sorted by the individual releases. You do have to remember these images also are stated off of the Japanese release, not the English release, and these tournament results typically are the Japanese results. So when you click into one, so like if you're looking at set 1 here, you can kind of get an idea of like which week when it was updated, what are the topping decks, like how many tops at each tournament. Then it's sorted by nations, so you can kind of pull a little bit of information from everything, and you can kind of just get an idea of what decks are popular, what decks are performing, and what cards people are running in those lists.
Yeah, it's really nice how they'll show every week from between like when the set came out in Japan to when the next set came out, and it'll show you like, okay, since set 1 came out to set 2, there have been like 36 Resil tops, and it can tell you exactly what's going on there. From it's usually keeping it mostly to the decks that showed up the most or were updated very recently or became new decks in that set. So like you're gonna see a lot of these are like like Resil and Welstra and Android and Varga, like decks that came out like in this set, and then like Luard and Shiranui, who came out relatively around the same time and also just had a very large representation. So I think this is like also like an extremely good resource, especially if you want to look ahead and have a bit more of like a solid picture of like how a meta shaped up for any individual set.
Yeah, the disadvantage and advantage of the Japanese release coming before the EN release is we do get the advantage of kind of getting an idea of what metas and what kind of cards are looking good in a specific set. And you can kind of see that adapt between the weeks. Like, okay, early on there's, Lucifer and Chris Rain kind of getting some early tops, and Paul Dio. And you can kind of see how it kind of the meta adapts a little bit and kind of refines itself a little bit between the different weeks. So it's really nice where you can also see kind of how, like, if once you get down to the actual deck list of everything, you can see the cards and everything that people are adapting from, because it lists out all of the weeks that these decks were played, what position they got, and you can kind of see what these informations are. Obviously, if you're not a fan of net decking, then you won't be using these resources anyways. But if you're really just using them to kind of get an idea of what the current meta will look like once the set comes out, it'll give you a good idea of what you're going to be going up against. It never hurts to do a little bit of research on anything.
Yeah, especially when you get down here to the individual nations, like, it'll show you, like, oh, okay, there was a lot of Night Rose here, okay, but what else happened in Stoic King? Because it's not just Night Rose, obviously. So then once you click into it, you can see, like, oh, there was a lot of Leonorn, there was a lot of Zorga, there was a lot of Levi-Dros. Like, yes, most of this is going to be taken up by Night Rose because of how much we're seeing here, but it's important to know that, like, at in every meta, even with, like, a pie chart that looks like this, it is not just these decks. Like, there are so many decks that get played, and there are so many decks that get updated with every set, that there's never going to be a meta where it's like, okay, now Night Rose is the Stoic K deck, but that's never going to be a thing that happens. So it's always worth checking in to your favorite deck, or the deck you're already playing, and seeing how it adapts to the meta, because there's always something that an older deck can take from a current set and keep it going. Like, Alinorn's a fantastic example with the great one it got in December.
Yeah. And sometimes all it takes is one card for a deck to be meta relevant again, or competitively viable again, just because having that one little piece that was a crucial part that was missing from a deck, like, puts it over that edge just a little bit to make it, okay, now I can actually fight with this. Like, I had an alright chance of winning, but now I have, like, an even better chance of winning, like, if I see this piece, type thing. So there's all sorts of things like that. I mean, Shoujo Doji obviously has always been very decent. It was able to get off a lot of attacks, and it has a lot of the pieces. The big thing, obviously, when it got its new form, that really pushed it over the edge. And one new common or single rare, I can't remember what it is, that really got it over the edge to really doing its 7 attacks and consistency. So there's a lot going on with it, but obviously that's a whole thing. But Night Rose obviously being a new set, new thing, there's gonna be a lot of recency bias on some of these things too, just because everyone's going to be taking them to tournaments to see how they compete. Not necessarily everyone, but a lot of people will. You can see obviously with Night Rose and Hari that did happen to change everything. So you can still see some of the usual suspects like Varga and Shiranui and Shoujo Doji, and then Paldio even here from this same individual set. But then when the deck sets came out after the fact, you can kind of see how it shifted a little bit in the meta here.
Yeah, it's actually, while we're here and before we go on to, like, the last website I want to talk about, it's really important that when we look at, like, pie charts like these, is by no means are these tournament results ever invalid, or they're not as valid as other kinds of results or whatever. That is not ever going to be what I'm going to push for, but it is always worth noting two things about pie charts like these. Like what Trey said, recency bias. People like to play the new stuff that comes out. Especially if it's like a pre-con that comes pre-built and you can just take the deck and use that, like, by itself, like, and it's a whole new deck, so you're gonna see a lot of that, because it could be that, like, a new player got into the game with it and they're doing really well with it at their first couple events, or established players are picking up the deck and they're doing really well with it because of how well they can pilot it, and just the amount of people who would move on to something new when they've been playing the same thing, like the same couple of decks rather, for so long. So it's always worth keeping that in mind, that just because you don't see like a deck that was performing really well anymore, by no means is it out of the race. It's never like just pegged down like 4-tier list just because it's like you don't see it in a recent list. There's always like a good fight that most like decks can bring to, at the very least, your locals, if not a regional, as we've seen.
Yeah. So enjoy the game, enjoy the cards. Obviously, none of this by means tells you what you should be playing.
Right.
It's just saying, hey, this is what people have been playing currently.
The other really, really important thing when it comes to Japanese tournament results is there is a concept called diversity cut in tournaments. So what that is essentially is, if you're on, let's say, like a team tournament, which is very popular in Japan, and you're gonna have a team of 3 people and you're all gonna have your own decks. You can't always play the same deck, or you can't match even with one other person in your team. So the idea is, what diversity cut is when you're playing through your games and you get a really similar score to a lot of other teams, and what will decide how you bubble out into top 8 is how many different ride lines are you running compared to the other teams. So a good example is, let's say I'm on a team with Trey, I'm playing Night Rose, he's playing Hari, and we have a third person and they're playing Shojidoji. If we are what is making up most of the pie chart as far as representation, like we're contributing to this, let's say 16 Night Rose and 10 Hari and 5 Shojidoji. The teams that don't have something like that, like let's say they've got a Shiranui, a Leonorn, and an Impaldio, or actually a better example, let's say they have a Night Rose, a Hari, and a Shiranui. So what they're going to see is that because there are way less Shiranui in these top teams, they're going to push them up to top 8, as opposed to ours, regardless of the fact that we have the same score as them, to promote, let's say, like a presentation of a more diverse meta or playing environment. And regardless of how we feel about that, maybe that's something for another episode, but at the end of the day, it just kind of you need to keep that in mind when you look at some tournaments. Like, if you're gonna see that there are like two really meta decks in a team, and then one really weird, like out there, like Barrow Magnus or something weird, or Spinal Marquee or whatever, somehow it gets there. Like, it could be that deck was doing pretty well that day, but it could also be that it just bubbled through because of diversity cut. And while that might not put a mark against a deck, it does add context to how it performed, I suppose.
The only thing to go along with that as well is the fact that those decks are still be playing at those top end tournaments in the hopes of squeaking out wins here and there to help their team move along. So all of those lists, although they may be kind of out there for a typical, top meta fighting chance, they're going to try things that will get them to be in their best situation to win. So it's not like those deck lists should be ignored or not paid attention to, because they're still going to be tried to be made optimally, I feel. At least I've seen in most cases that is the case. Sometimes they may have like little goofy one ofs or two ofs or something, like it's a random tech that's like a miscellaneous win condition, but for the most part I feel that they're trying to still win with those decks, even though they're trying to just fill that diversity cut.
Yeah, so to round it off here, we'll just get into like the premier way to look at deck lists now, and it's really nice that Bushiroad themselves has made this resource for us, and it's the deck log. It's very nice. It can be used for all the Bushiroad card games. Obviously, we'll just keep it to Vanguard for now, but it's whenever you would see like I don't know if I have a good example, but if you're on your like news sources for tournaments and you see like an image of like, oh, these were like the top 3 teams, every single deck in those teams is going to have like a little code that you can punch in here on the top right, and it'll give you the exact deck list of that deck that won. Essentially, is how it works. And we'll illustrate that with this topping Varga list I just threw in randomly from a Japanese tournament that concluded last weekend as time of recording. And, you know, you can see that it's showing you what you need to see. You might not know exactly what all the cards do, obviously, because they're Japanese, but it would work the same in English. So you can click on each individual one and look at them more closely, how many copies they ran, maybe any tech choices. This one's a pretty safe list, if I'm being honest. There's not too much going on here, but you can also see exactly the rarities that people ran, which is always nice. I do always appreciate when people go far enough to get like a silver rare for the right line.
Yeah, it's again, to repeat, it's very nice that Bushy themselves makes this and runs this, and it makes it very easy because when you go into actually creating them, it does have every single edition of the card, including like reprints and sets, so you can get very specific with what you have in a list if you want. I know this also can be used, and I've seen people in the past use this to create like a deck log of things, and it also helps use them keep like an inventory of what they have specifically and individually on cards. Obviously, this is an extreme in that instance because most of these things aren't editable. Once you make a list, it kind of locks it in so that when you want to go back and reference that deck log code, it'll take you back and you can see exactly what was in that list and non-editable. You can, duplicate a list and make adjustments from there, which is also nice as well. In most of these instances, you can also create an exact copy of a list and then make adjustments as well. By hitting this option up here, you can go in here and make a copy of the deck and then make adjustments as you need.
Yeah, and so as far as using the site as well to make your own deck, probably easier to illustrate with the English one, I imagine. But it's very simple. Like, you just hit the deck creation and then you pick the format. Most of the time, it's probably going to be standard. You pick your nation, Dragon Empire, because that's all the teams is, and then you'll see like it'll always start with your right deck. Very importantly, this was actually something that was very recent as far as how it works with the deck log. I don't know if any of you started using this back when Standard first came out. I know you had to pick individually each of your cards with this little V stamp here, and it would put it in your right deck. But now you just pick your right deck first, and it'll always start with the grade 3. So, oh man, I'm playing Shojidoji, there he is. It filled that one little thing there. And then you just go along with that to fill out your right deck, and I guess you always got to put in your energy generator for how different they are.
That's my favorite part about this is having
it's a little silly.
Energy crest, having the individual numbers does matter to people sometimes, so.
Yeah. And then, after that, you just get into your main deck, and you can separate it by normal units and trigger units and orders and grade and what kind of power they're at, or if they don't have a nation at all. So you can very quickly find like the Elementaria, and like your Regalis pieces are really sometimes annoying thing to try to find. Of course, it's getting a little clogged with the amount of collaborative triggers we have, but you can finally get to like the over triggers that you need and all that stuff. So it's a really well made system, and it's not hard to use to like share your deck with your friends, or if you top your locals, you can be like, okay, this is what I used to take it. So yeah.
And theory crafting with it sometimes is also kind of nice, because then you can sort by grades and cards, and you can look for specific like card types. Like, I know when Spina Marquee came out, it's like, oh, you need Dino Dragons. Okay, you type in Dino Dragons and it will filter all the Dino Dragon cards, and you kind of get an idea of what you want for that. So it's a useful tool in a lot of instances. Sometimes it's just nice to share a deck log with a friend. Like, I had a buddy approach me about wanting to build a timestamping dragon deck. So I built out a deck log for him and was able to send that to him to be able to look at it and see it in those instances. So there's an infinite number of uses for these types of things, but use them how you'd like.
Yeah, that was actually a very good point. just typing in like, oh, I only want cards that either are Varga or reference Varga. Like, here are all the cards that will straight up have him in there in some way, and that is honestly the easiest way you can find what directly supports your deck. So yeah, I think it's a really good way to get everything together and make sure you have the right ratios for stuff like that, because that's a very important feature about the website as well, as that when you look at like a list and it will tell you like how many of a grade it's running. Like, this list ran only 9 grade 2s, which might be you might not understand why, so you look and be like, okay, they run this new grade 3 rear guard, so it's going to up your grade 3 count a little bit more. So like that kind of a thing that you can always keep in mind when you look at these. But with that, I think that's kind of all we wanted to show you guys. There's not too much here, but there is a lot to chew on as far as getting informed about the game and making sure you're going through it as deliberately as possible so you have the best experience.
Yep. Yeah, we hope that these become useful to you. And if you have any other websites or online resources that you use, obviously there's many, so don't be afraid to list them down below. We may have used some of these and forgot to add them to this list, or maybe you find that there's another website that does the same thing but just in a better version. Tell us why it is. Like, let us know. We love to hear that feedback and see what everyone else is using, because the game's always growing, and we're glad that there are enough resources out there for everyone to be able to kind of tinker and play with things and get that information that is so like heavy and importance to our game. So keep on keeping on, and we'll keep doing it.
Yeah, it's been ever since the podcast started, we've been enjoying and appreciating the growth. It's always nice to hear from you guys, so let's keep that going, and we'll be sure to give you more resources like this to help you through the game. So until then, thanks for watching all the way through. If you did, be sure to like the video if you found it helpful. I'm sure we could have, like you said, I'm sure we could have missed something, or maybe there's like a website that we don't know about that you found really helpful. We'd love to hear about it. And along with that, just make sure if you enjoyed what we've been putting out, make sure to ring that bell so you know when we get new stuff out there. And subscribe if you've been coming back over and over, if you feel like you're a repeat customer. So until the next one, I was Cole.
And I was Trey.
And we'll see you in the next one.